A rich and lonely businessman tries to fulfill the last promise he made to his father while walking among ordinary people. But a silent gesture from a mother starving with her children breaks his indifference. From this unexpected encounter on, his life, and theirs, will never be the same. If this story interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. I promise this will be the best story you will ever listen to in your life. Chapter 1. New York City was waking up under a gray sky that Thursday morning, with traffic already heavy on Fifth Avenue and the usual rush of people hurrying to their appointments. Among the imposing buildings of the Upper East Side, a three-story mansion stood out for its classic architecture and meticulously kept gardens. This was the home of Ryan Anderson Caldwell, a 38-year-old man who had inherited one of the largest real estate empires in Manhattan. Ryan woke up that morning with the same sense of emptiness that had been his companion for months. The king-size bed seemed even larger when he got up alone, and the silence of the house echoed through the wide marble hallways like a constant reminder of his solitude. He went to the bathroom, looked at himself in the mirror, and saw a well-dressed man, clean-shaven with perfectly styled hair, but whose eyes carried a deep sadness that no Italian suit could hide. It had been 6 months since his father, Arthur Caldwell, had passed away after a long battle with an illness that slowly consumed his strength. Arthur had been a rigid man, dedicated to his business, who had built the real estate empire brick by brick, contract by contract. Ryan had grown up in the shadow of that giant, learning from an early age that feelings were luxuries that businessmen couldn't afford to cultivate, and so he had become a perfect replica of his father, cold, calculating, efficient, until Arthur was no longer there. In his final days, however, something had changed in the old Caldwell. Lying in that hospital bed, with tubes and machines monitoring every weak beat of his heart, Arthur had asked his son to come closer. Ryan remembered that moment perfectly. His father's frail hand holding his with surprising strength, the eyes that were once hard now shining with unshed tears. "My son," Arthur had said in a hoarse voice, "I built an empire, but I missed out on life. You have everything I've left you, but don't make the same mistake I did. Get out of this ivory tower. Go to the streets, to the parks. See how people live. Promise me you'll do that. Promise me you won't live like I did. Isolated, alone, without understanding the real world." Ryan had promised. At that moment, he would have promised anything to bring a little peace to the man who was saying goodbye. And now, months later, he was still trying to keep that promise, even if he didn't fully understand what his father meant by those words. Every morning, after reviewing financial reports and signing documents his executive assistant left organized on his office desk, Ryan would leave his house and walk to Washington Square Park in downtown Manhattan. It wasn't a place where people of his social standing usually went. The park was a meeting point for workers on their lunch breaks, street vendors, performers, and families who couldn't afford to go to malls and paid attractions. At first, Ryan felt completely out of place. He wore suits that were too expensive, shoes that cost more than many people there earned in a month. People looked at him with suspicion or curiosity, and he didn't know how to act, how to carry himself in a universe so distant from his own. But as the weeks went by, he learned to observe. He would sit on one of the wooden benches, worn down by time, and simply watch life happen around him. He saw mothers with small children running among the pigeons, men selling popsicles from colorful carts, young couples sharing simple snacks on benches under the shade of the trees. He also saw the harsh reality of inequality, people sleeping on cardboard under the arch, children asking passers-by for change, elderly people digging through trash cans for recyclables. All of this existed just a few miles from his mansion, but it was as if they were completely separate worlds. On that particular Thursday, Ryan arrived at the park around 10 in the morning. The sun was finally starting to break through the grey clouds, and the temperature was rising quickly. He bought a coffee from a street vendor, something he would never have done months ago, and sat on his usual bench near a fountain that no longer worked. It was then that his eyes fixed on a scene across the park. Near a defunct newsstand, a woman was sitting on the ground with 2 children by her side. She looked to be around 30, with brown hair tied back in a simple ponytail. her clothes clean but visibly worn from time and use. The children, a boy who looked about 8 and a girl of about 5, were sitting quietly, with a stillness that isn't natural in healthy children, but comes from a lack of energy, from prolonged hunger. Ryan watched as the woman opened a small plastic container. Inside was rice, beans, and a small piece of chicken. It wasn't enough for one person, let alone 3. With careful gestures, she divided the food into 3 unequal portions. The largest went to the children, served on small plastic plates she took from a tattered bag. For herself, she was left with less than half of what she gave each child. Something in Ryan's chest tightened. He had never paid attention to this kind of scene before. He knew poverty existed, of course, but it was always an abstract concept. Numbers in reports, statistics on the news. Seeing it happen right in front of him, seeing the mother give all the food to her children while she herself had almost nothing, was completely different. The children ate slowly, chewing each forkful as if they knew it might be their only meal of the day. The woman didn't even touch her portion right away. She watched her children with a look that mixed unconditional love and a sadness so profound that Ryan felt he could see all of that mother's pain in just that one glance. When the boy finished his portion, he looked at his mother's container with a hunger that was not yet satisfied. The woman noticed and, without hesitation, offered half of what was on her plate to her son. The boy wanted to refuse. Ryan saw it in the shake of his head, but his hunger was stronger. He accepted, and the mother was left with an even smaller amount of food. It was then that Ryan noticed. The woman was trembling. It wasn't from the cold, because the day was warm. It was weakness. She was too weak, probably from not eating properly for days. Even so, she maintained an upright posture, her dignity intact, a forced smile on her lips as she spoke softly to her children, probably telling them a story to distract them from the cruel reality they were living. Ryan stood up from the bench, moved by an impulse he couldn't name. He took a few steps toward them but stopped. What was he going to do? Walk up and offer money? That could offend the woman, make her feel humiliated. He didn't know how to act. He had no experience with this kind of situation. People in his social circle simply didn't deal with these things directly. He stood there at a safe distance, watching. The girl finished eating and snuggled into her mother's lap. The woman hugged her tenderly, kissing the top of the child's head while the boy put the plastic plates back in the bag. Everything about that family, despite the terrible circumstances, had an air of care, of love, of dignity preserved against all odds. Ryan returned to his bench, but couldn't take his eyes off the scene. He stayed there for another hour, watching the woman and children simply exist. At one point, the boy tried to make his sister laugh by making funny faces. The girl let out a weak giggle, and that sound, even from a distance, reached Ryan's ears like something precious. How could those children still laugh in the midst of so much suffering? The sun was stronger now, and Ryan noticed that the woman began to look even more worn out. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, clearly fighting against the dizziness caused by her weakness. The children noticed, and the boy held his mother's hand, saying something Ryan couldn't hear from where he was. That's when it happened. The girl who was sitting next to her mother suddenly turned pale. Her little eyes rolled back, and she started to fall to the side. The mother screamed, trying to catch her, but she herself was too weak. The boy panicked, calling his sister's name, shaking the small limp body. Ryan didn't think. He just ran. In a matter of seconds, he was beside them, kneeling on the rough ground of the park. The girl was unconscious, breathing faintly. The mother, in despair, was trying to wake her, tears streaming down her face as she repeated her daughter's name. "Mariah, Mariah, wake up, honey, please." Ryan placed his hand on the girl's wrist. There was a pulse, but it was weak. She was clearly malnourished, her little body too light for a 5-year-old. He looked at the mother and spoke in the calmest voice he could manage, though his heart was racing. "Ma'am, we need to get your daughter to a hospital right now. I have a car nearby. I can take you." The woman looked at him with wide eyes, confused, scared, but also desperate. She had no other options. She nodded, unable to speak. Ryan carefully picked up the girl, surprised by how light she was, and began to walk quickly toward the parking garage where he had left his car. The woman and the boy followed, running to keep up with his long strides. The black Mercedes was 2 blocks away. Ryan opened the back door and gently placed the girl on the seat. The mother got in beside her daughter, holding her small hand and crying softly. The boy got in too, squeezing into the remaining space. Ryan got into the driver's seat, started the car and sped through the streets of New York. He knew of an excellent private hospital about 15 minutes away, Mount Sinai. He drove skillfully but not recklessly, weaving through the heavy traffic while keeping an eye on the rear-view mirror to check on the girl. She remained unconscious, and the mother continued to cry, whispering prayers under her breath. The boy, sitting next to his mother, looked at Ryan with a mixture of fear and hope. Ryan tried to smile to reassure him, but his own heart was too tight for the smile to be convincing. "What's your name?" Ryan asked, trying to make some conversation to calm everyone down. "Peter," the boy answered in a trembling voice. "And my sister is Mariah. My mom is Julia." Ryan nodded. "Everything's going to be okay, Peter. We're almost at the hospital." They arrived at Mount Sinai in record time. Ryan pulled the car up to the emergency entrance, got out quickly and picked up Mariah again. A team of nurses and doctors was already at the door, alerted by the security staff who had seen the car approaching at high speed. "Severe malnutrition. A 5-year-old girl. She passed out about 15 minutes ago," Ryan told the doctor who approached him. The team acted with impressive efficiency. They placed Mariah on a gurney, checked her vital signs, and rushed her inside. Julia tried to follow them, but her legs gave out. Ryan caught her before she could fall. "You need medical attention too," he said firmly. "Peter, hold my hand." The boy obeyed, and Ryan guided them into the hospital. At the reception desk, an administrator started asking questions about health insurance, documents, authorizations. Ryan simply took out his wallet and placed his platinum credit card on the counter. "Run all the necessary tests on all 3 of them. Tell them if you have to. All expenses are on me. Here's my ID." The administrator looked at the card, at Ryan's ID, recognized the Caldwell surname, and immediately changed her tone. "Of course, Mr. Caldwell. I'll arrange everything right away." Julia was taken to an examination room, as was Peter. Ryan stayed in the waiting room, pacing back and forth, his hands in his pockets, his tie loosened. He didn't fully understand why he was doing this. He didn't know these people. He could have just called an ambulance and left. But something about that scene in the park had touched him in a way he couldn't explain. Maybe it was his father's words echoing in his mind. "Get out of this ivory tower. See how people live." Or maybe it was something deeper, a human connection he had lost so long ago that he couldn't even remember the last time he felt something genuine for someone who wasn't connected by blood or business. 2 hours passed. Ryan drank 3 coffees from the hospital's vending machine. They were all terrible, but he needed something to do with his hands. Finally, a doctor approached him. She was a middle-aged woman in a crisp white coat with a serious expression. "Mr. Caldwell? I'm Dr. Miller, in charge of the family's care. May I have a word with you?" Ryan stood up immediately. "Yes. How are they?" The doctor sighed. "The girl, Mariah, is stable. It was indeed severe malnutrition, combined with dehydration. We've started an IV drip and we're giving her glucose and nutrients. She'll need to be hospitalized for at least 3 days to regain her strength. The mother, Julia, is also suffering from malnutrition, though not as severe as her daughter. The boy, Peter, is in better shape, but he also shows signs of prolonged inadequate nutrition." Ryan felt a weight in his chest. "What's the prognosis?" "With proper treatment, they will all make a full recovery. But Mr. Caldwell, I need to tell you something. We spoke with Mrs. Julia. She told me about her situation. It's a delicate one." Ryan gestured for her to continue. "She lost her job 6 months ago when she had to miss work repeatedly to care for Mariah, who had a severe respiratory infection. Without her salary, she couldn't pay the rent on the small apartment where they lived. The landlord evicted them about 2 months ago. The children's father abandoned them over a year ago, doesn't pay child support, and she doesn't know where he is. Since then, she and her children have been living on the street, or rather in parks, trying to survive on what little they can get. She took on odd jobs when possible, But with two small children, it's very difficult to find work. The last decent meal they had was 3 days ago when a church handed out food in the park. Ryan was silent, processing the information. He knew poverty existed, but hearing the specific details of this woman's life was different. Every word from the doctor felt like a punch to the gut. "She can't go back to the street in this condition," Ryan said finally. "Neither she nor the children. They need a safe place, proper food, time to recover." The doctor nodded in agreement. "Mr. Caldwell, what you're doing for them is already extraordinary. But yes, ideally, they would need a few months of continuous care. There are public shelters, but they're overcrowded, and the conditions aren't always the best." Ryan didn't answer right away. An idea was forming in his mind, an idea that months ago he would have considered completely absurd. But now, standing in that hospital corridor, after seeing the reality of that family with his own eyes, after carrying that little girl who was far too light in his arms, something inside him had changed. "Doctor, when Mrs. Julia is able to receive visitors, I'd like to speak with her." The doctor seemed surprised, but agreed. "She's awake now, just weak. She can have a brief visit if you'd like." Ryan followed the doctor down the hospital corridors to a private room on the 3rd floor. They knocked on the door and entered. Julia was lying in bed, an IV connected to her arm. Her face had more color now, but her eyes still showed the exhaustion of months living on the streets. Peter was sitting in a chair beside his mother, and through the slightly ajar bathroom door, Ryan could see a nurse tending to Mariah in another bed. Julia looked at Ryan, and her eyes immediately filled with tears. She tried to sit up, but he gestured for her to stay down. "Please don't get up. How are you feeling?" I don't know how to... I don't know how." "Thank you, sir," she began, her voice choked with emotion. "You saved my daughter, you saved my children. I'll find a way to pay for all of this, I promise. Even if it takes years, I'll pay back every cent." Ryan pulled a chair over and sat beside the bed, maintaining a respectful distance. "Mrs. Julia, you don't need to thank me, and you certainly don't need to think about payment right now. The important thing is that you all get well." "But I can't just accept all of this," she protested. "You don't even know me. Why are you doing this?" Ryan was silent for a moment, thinking about the answer. Why was he doing this? "I made a promise to my father before he passed," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "He asked me to get out of my bubble, to see the real world, to connect with people. Today in the park I saw you. I saw how you cared for your children with so much love, even with so little. I saw the dignity you maintained despite everything. And when Mariah collapsed, I couldn't just walk away. I can't really explain it, but I felt it was what I had to do." Julia wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "Even so, sir, this is more than anyone would do. You're an angel that God put in our path." Ryan shook his head, uncomfortable with that kind of praise. "I'm no angel, far from it, but I have a proposal for you, if you'll allow me." Julia looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. "A proposal?" "Yes. The doctor told me about your situation. I know you're homeless, that you need time to recover and get your life back. On track. I have a large house, a very large house, in fact, too large for one person. It has several empty rooms, a fully equipped kitchen, plenty of space. I'd like to offer a room for you and your children. Temporarily, of course, until you can get back on your feet. It would just be a safe place to stay, eat well, and for the children to rest." The silence that followed was heavy. Julia stared at him with wide eyes, clearly not believing what she was hearing. Peter, who had been listening to everything, was also dumbfounded. "Sir, are you offering me a place to live? In your house?" Julia seemed unable to process the information. "But you don't know me. I'm a stranger. How can you trust me like that?" "Look, I know it sounds strange," Ryan admitted, "and I'll completely understand if you refuse. But the truth is, my house has been empty for months. Since my father passed, it's just me there, with a housekeeper who comes twice a week to clean rooms I don't even use. I'm not asking for anything in return. You don't have to work for me or anything like that. It's just temporary help until you can get back on your feet." Julia looked at her son, who looked back at her with hope in his eyes. Then she looked toward the bathroom door, from where the soft sounds of the nurse caring for Mariah came. Ryan could see the conflict happening inside her, pride fighting against need, suspicion fighting against desperation. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "If I accept, it would only be until I can find a job and save enough money to rent a place. I don't want to take advantage of your kindness, and I'll help with whatever I can around the house, cooking, cleaning, anything." Ryan nodded. "It's a deal, but first you all need to recover completely. The doctor said Mariah needs to stay for 3 days. When you're discharged, we can go to the house and see how things work. If you don't feel comfortable, no problem, we can look for other alternatives." Julia agreed, the tears starting to fall again. "Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. You have no idea how much this means to us." Ryan stood up, suddenly uncomfortable with all the emotion. "I'll leave my phone number with the nurse. If you need anything, you can call me. I'll be back tomorrow to see how you're doing." He left the room feeling a strange mix of emotions. He had just invited a family of strangers to live in his house. This was crazy. His lawyers would be horrified. His business colleagues would say he was being naive. But at the same time, for the first time in months, Ryan felt like he had done something meaningful, something that went beyond signing contracts and adding more zeros to his bank account. On the way home, driving through the streets of New York as the sun began to set, Ryan thought of his father. "Is this what you meant, Dad? Is this what you were trying to teach me?" There was no answer, only the sound of traffic and the city lights beginning to switch on, one by one in the growing darkness. Ryan parked the car in his mansion's garage and entered the silent house. He went up to the second floor and opened the door to one of the guest rooms that hadn't been used in years. It was a spacious room with a queen-size bed, a twin bed against the opposite wall, an old mahogany wardrobe and a large window overlooking the garden. He stood there in the middle of the empty room, imagining what it would be like to have this house full of life again. The voices of children, hurried footsteps in the hallways, the smell of food being cooked in the kitchen. When was the last time this house had life? When was the last time he himself had felt alive? Ryan didn't know if he was doing the right thing, but he knew he couldn't go back now. Something had changed inside him. That day in the park, a door that had been closed for years had opened, even if just a crack. And for the first time since his father's passing, Ryan Anderson Caldwell felt something other than emptiness. He felt purpose. Chapter 2. The next 3 days passed in a routine Ryan had never experienced. Every morning, after a quick review of the most urgent company reports, he would drive to Mount Sinai Hospital to visit Julia and the children. He brought fresh fruit, natural juices, and some magazines and children's books he bought at a bookstore on the way. He didn't know exactly what a 5-year-old would like to read, so he asked the sales clerk for help, who chose colorful stories with large illustrations and age-appropriate text. Mariah had woken up the day after she fainted, still fragile but conscious. When Ryan entered the room on that second visit, she was lying in bed with her head propped up on white pillows, holding a teddy bear that a kind nurse had brought her. Her little brown eyes followed him with curiosity as he approached. "Hi, Mariah," Ryan said softly, sitting in the chair next to the bed. "How are you? Feeling today?" The girl looked at her mother as if asking for permission to speak. Julia, sitting on the other side of the bed, nodded to encourage her daughter. "Better," Mariah replied in a thin, shy voice. "The ladies here are really nice. They gave me a teddy bear." Ryan smiled. "He's very handsome. What's his name?" "I don't know yet. I'm thinking." "How about coffee?" Ryan suggested without much thought. "Because he's brown like coffee." Mariah let out a soft giggle, the first genuine sound of joy Ryan had heard from her. "Coffee, that's a funny name for a bear." "Yeah, but it fits, doesn't it?" Mariah looked at the teddy bear, considering it seriously. "Okay, his name is Coffee then." Peter was sitting in an armchair in the corner of the room, flipping through a car magazine Ryan had brought the day before. The boy seemed more reserved than his sister, observing the businessman with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. Ryan understood. This boy had probably learned from a young age to be protective of his mother and sister, to distrust strangers, especially unknown men who appeared out of nowhere offering help. "I brought some books for you guys," Ryan said, pulling the wrapped items from a bag. "For you, Mariah, stories about princesses and animals. And for you, Peter, I found a book about inventions and how things work. I thought you might like it." Peter stood up and took the book carefully, as if it were something precious. "Seriously? I can keep it?" "Of course, it's yours." The boy opened the book to the first page, his eyes lighting up when he saw diagrams of how airplanes fly and how engines work. "Thanks, Mr. Caldwell. This is really cool." "You can just call me Ryan." Julia had recovered much faster than Mariah. Her malnutrition was serious, but hadn't reached a critical point like her daughter's. She could already walk around the room, shower on her own, and her face was regaining its color. But Ryan noticed she carried a different kind of weight. It wasn't just physical. It was the shame of having reached that point, the guilt of not being able to protect her children better, the fear of an uncertain future. One afternoon, while the children were napping after lunch, Ryan and Julia talked on the small balcony of the room. The sun streamed through the windows, creating patterns of light on the floor, and the sound of the city was muffled, distant. "Mr. Ryan," Julia began hesitantly, "I need to know. Why are you doing all this? For real? I don't understand. People like you don't usually even look at people like me on the street, and suddenly you show up, pay for the hospital, offer your home. There has to be a reason." Ryan was silent for a moment, looking out at the city below through the window. How could he explain something he didn't fully understand himself? "My father passed away 6 months ago," he began slowly. "He built an empire from scratch, worked his whole life, sacrificed everything for the business, including his own life, his own happiness. When he was in the hospital, in his last days, he made me promise I wouldn't live like he did, that I would get out of my ivory tower, that I would get to know the real world, real people. I promised, but I had no idea how to keep that promise. So I started walking through Washington Square Park every morning, just observing, trying to understand." He paused, searching for the right words. "And then I saw you. I saw how you took care of your children with so much love, even with so little. I saw the way you divided that food, leaving almost nothing for yourself so they could eat. And when Mariah fainted, something inside me just reacted. I didn't think, I just acted. And now, talking to you, hearing your story, I realize that maybe this is the answer my father wanted me to find, that there's a world beyond contracts and properties, a world of real people, with real stories, fighting real battles." Julia wiped away a tear that was rolling down her cheek. "Your father must have been a very wise man, and you're keeping the promise you made to him in a way that I'm sure would make him proud." "I hope so," Ryan said softly. "Can I ask you something?" Julia said after a moment. "Have you never married? Never had children?" "No, I've always been very focused on the business. Relationships never lasted long. The women I met in my social circle always seemed more interested in the Caldwell name than in me, and I didn't help much either. I was cold, distant, just like my father. I ended up alone." "Loneliness is hard," Julia agreed, "but you're still young. You have time to find someone." Ryan didn't answer. The subject made him uncomfortable, so he changed it. "And you? The doctor told me the children's father abandoned them, if you don't mind telling me." Julia took a deep breath, as if gathering the strength to talk about it. "Carl was different when we met, or at least I thought he was. We dated for 3 years before we got married. He worked as a salesman at a hardware store, made a decent living. I worked as a secretary in a small office. When Peter was born, things were still good. We lived in a simple but comfortable apartment in Queens, but when I got pregnant with Mariah, everything changed." She paused, her gaze distant, lost in painful memories. "Carl started drinking. He'd lose jobs, get new ones, lose them again. I held things together as long as I could, but with 2 small children, it was hard to work full-time. He became irritable, aggressive. He never hit me, but the words hurt just as much. He said I was a burden, that the kids were a burden, that he deserved a better life. One night, about 1.5 years ago, he just left. He left a note saying he was going to try his luck in another state and that he wasn't coming back." Ryan felt anger rising inside him. How could a man abandon his own family like that? "I'm sorry you went through that. And after that?" "After that, it was all downhill. I had some savings, but it wasn't enough. I managed to cover the rent for a few months by doing odd jobs, cleaning, anything I could find. But when Mariah got sick with that bad respiratory infection, I had to miss the steady job I'd managed to get. I was fired. Without a salary, there was no way. The landlord wouldn't accept late payments and evicted us. We tried staying with a cousin of mine for a few weeks, but her husband didn't want us there any longer. He said he couldn't feed more mouths, and that's how we ended up on the streets. Julia wiped away the tears that insisted on falling. I never imagined my life would turn into this, you know. I went to school, I always worked, I've always been honest. But sometimes it feels like no matter how hard you try, the world just pushes you down and won't let you get back up. Ryan didn't know what to say. All of his life experiences were so different from hers that any words of comfort would seem empty, superficial. So he just placed his hand lightly on hers, a simple gesture of solidarity. "It's going to be okay now," he said. "You're going to recover. You'll have a safe place to stay and you'll be able to rebuild your life. I'll help in any way I can." Julia looked at him with those eyes that had seen so much suffering, but still held on to hope. "Thank you, Ryan. Really. You don't know how much your words mean to me." On the third day, Dr. Miller discharged all of them. Mariah had recovered surprisingly well. The resilience of children always amazed the doctors. She had more color, was more cheerful, and could walk without getting dizzy. Peter and Julia were also in good condition. Before they left the hospital, Ryan made sure they all had final, comprehensive checkups. He wanted to be absolutely certain they were healthy before taking them home. A nurse helped Julia and the children change into new clothes that Ryan had bought. Nothing extravagant, just simple, comfortable and appropriate pieces. Jeans, t-shirts, a little floral dress for Mariah, new sneakers for everyone. Julia protested about the expense, but Ryan insisted. The clothes they had before were too worn out, and he wanted them to start this new phase with dignity. When they left the hospital on that sunny Friday afternoon, Ryan felt a strange sensation in his chest. He was about to bring 3 strangers into his home, the house where he grew up, where his father had lived and died. It was a scary and at the same time strangely comforting feeling. The drive to the Upper East Side was quiet. Peter and Mariah had their faces pressed against the car window, watching the city go by. They probably weren't used to riding in a car, let alone a luxury Mercedes with leather seats and air conditioning. Julia was quiet in the back seat, her hands clasped in her lap, clearly nervous. When Ryan pulled up to the electronic gate of his house, he saw everyone's eyes widen. The gate opened automatically, and he drove up the cobblestone driveway to the garage. The mansion was truly imposing. 3 stories of neoclassical architecture, well-manicured gardens, a decorative fountain at the entrance that his father had installed decades ago. "Welcome to your new temporary home," Ryan said, turning off the engine. They got out of the car and just stood there, looking at the building as if they were in a dream. Mariah held tightly to her mother's hand, and Peter carried the small bag with the few belongings they had. Ryan opened the main door and led them inside. The entrance hall was spacious, with Italian marble floors, a crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, and a grand wooden staircase leading to the 2nd floor. Landscape paintings decorated the walls, and vases with fresh floral arrangements filled the alcoves. "Wow," whispered Mariah, her little eyes shining. "Is it a castle?" Ryan smiled. "Not exactly, but it is big. Come on, I'll show you your room." He led them up the stairs to the 2nd floor. The hallway was wide with several doors on each side. Ryan stopped in front of the 3rd door on the right and opened it. The room he had chosen was spacious and had 2 beds, a queen and a twin, as well as the antique wardrobe and a dresser. The large window let in plenty of natural light and overlooked the backyard, where fruit trees grew around a green lawn. "This is your room," Ryan said. "The bathroom is right there, it's all yours. There are clean towels, soap, shampoo, everything you'll need. The kitchen is on the 1st floor. You can eat whatever you want, whenever you want. My room is at the end of the hall if you need anything." Julia entered the room slowly, as if afraid it would all disappear if she moved too quickly. She ran her hand over the bed, testing the softness of the mattress. The children ran to the window, pointing at the trees and shouting excitedly when they saw a squirrel jumping from branch to branch. "Ryan, this is too much," Julia said, her voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how we'll ever repay you for all this." "You don't need to repay anything. Just get comfortable and recover. We'll figure out the rest as we go." He left them to explore the room in peace and went down to the kitchen. Mrs. Celia, the housekeeper, who had worked for the family for over 20 years, would be coming the next morning as usual. Ryan would need to talk to her about the new situation. For now, he decided to make something for dinner. He looked in the fridge and found some basic ingredients. He wasn't an experienced cook, but he could make a few simple things. He decided on pasta with tomato sauce and grilled chicken. Nothing fancy, but it would be nutritious and filling. While he was cooking, he heard footsteps coming down the stairs. It was Peter, who appeared at the kitchen door with a curious expression. "Can I help, Mr. Ryan?" "Sure. And you can just call me Ryan. How about you chop these vegetables for the salad?" The two worked side by side in the kitchen. Peter was careful and meticulous, cutting the tomatoes and cucumbers into uniform pieces. Ryan realized the boy was probably used to helping his mother, who must have taught her children to be helpful and responsible from a young age. "Do you like school, Peter?" Ryan asked as he stirred the sauce in the pan. "I do, or I did. I stopped going when we lost our apartment. My mom promised I'd go back as soon as things got better. She always said studying was important." "It is important. What grade were you in?" "Third grade. I was good at math. The teacher always said I had a knack for numbers." Ryan smiled. "Math is great. Very useful in life. Would you like to go back to school?" Peter's eyes lit up. "Seriously? I can?" "Of course. We'll find a good school nearby and get you enrolled. And Mariah too, when she's a little stronger. Education is important." "Thanks, Ryan," Peter said sincerely. "You're a really nice person. I didn't trust you at first, but now I see you're different." Ryan felt a tightness in his chest. "You can trust me, Peter. I'm going to take care of you and your family." Dinner was served at the kitchen table, not in the formal dining room that Ryan rarely used. Julia insisted on helping set the table, and Mariah was too excited to sit still, running around the kitchen and asking questions about everything she saw. When they finally sat down to eat, there was a moment of silence. Julia and the children looked at the food in front of them with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. It was a simple meal, but for someone who had spent months eating sporadically, it looked like a feast. "Can we eat?" Peter asked quietly. "Of course," Ryan said. "It's all for us." Julia made sure they all said grace before eating, thanking God for the food and for Ryan's kindness. He wasn't particularly religious, but he respected the moment, bowing his head along with them. As they began to eat, Ryan watched how the children chewed slowly, savoring each bite. It was different from how people accustomed to abundance ate, always in a hurry, taking food for granted. After dinner, Julia insisted on washing the dishes. Ryan tried to stop her, saying she needed to rest, but she was firm. "I need to feel useful, Ryan. Please, let me do this." He understood. It wasn't about gratitude or payment. It was about dignity, about not feeling completely dependent, about maintaining some sense of control in a situation where she had very little control over anything. While Julia washed the dishes and Ryan dried, Peter took Mariah up to their room. Soon the sound of children's laughter could be heard from upstairs. It was a sound that House hadn't heard in a very long time. Ryan and Julia worked in comfortable silence, moving around the kitchen with an unexpected synchronicity. "Thank you for everything, Ryan," Julia said as they put away the last plate. "Seriously, I don't have the words to express how much this means to me and my children. I'm happy I can help. I really am." Julia looked at him with a thoughtful expression. "Can I ask you something? Aren't you scared letting us into your house like this? We're strangers." "A little," Ryan admitted honestly. "But my gut tells me you're good people who have been through some hard times, and sometimes you have to trust your gut." "Well, you can trust us. I'll take care of this house as if it were my own. And as soon as I can get back on my feet, I'll leave and let you get back to your normal life." Ryan didn't answer right away. The truth was, he wasn't sure he wanted to go back to his normal life. His normal life was loneliness, Silence, emptiness. This, having people in the house, hearing laughter, sharing meals, felt more alive than anything he had experienced in years. That first night was strange for everyone. Ryan lay in his king-size bed, listening to the sounds of the house that weren't his own. Footsteps in the hall, muffled voices talking, a toilet flushing, the creak of a bed as someone turned over. They were the sounds of life, of people inhabiting the space. And for the first time in months, Ryan didn't feel completely alone. The next morning, Ryan woke up to a smell he hadn't smelled in years. The smell of fresh coffee brewing, of toast being made, of scrambled eggs. He went down to the kitchen, still in his pajamas, and found Julia making breakfast. She was wearing an apron she had found in a drawer, her hair up in a bun, humming softly as she worked. "Good morning," she said when she saw him. "I hope you don't mind. I found everything in the fridge and thought I'd make breakfast for all of us." "I don't mind at all," Ryan said, surprised by how much the scene touched him. It's been a long time since this kitchen has seen this much activity. The children appeared soon after, still sleepy but excited. They sat at the table and began to chat animatedly about the dreams they'd had, about the squirrel they saw in the garden, about how soft the beds were. It was a normal family conversation, something so common for millions of people but so rare in Ryan's life. Mrs. Celia arrived at 9 in the morning as always. She was a woman in her 60s with grey hair who had known Ryan since he was a child. When she walked through the kitchen door and saw the scene, his family sitting at the table having breakfast, she stopped in surprise. "Mrs. Celia," Ryan said, standing up, "let me introduce you. This is Julia and her children, Peter and Mariah. They'll be staying with us for a while." Mrs. Celia looked from Ryan to Julia and back to Ryan, processing the information. Then a slow smile spread across her face. "A pleasure to meet you all. And it's so good to finally have people in this house again. It was getting sad seeing Mr. Ryan here all alone all the time." Ryan was slightly embarrassed but grateful. During the day, Mrs. Celia showed Julia where everything was in the house, how the appliances worked, where the cleaning supplies were kept. Julia absorbed everything attentively, asking questions, mentally noting every detail. In the afternoon, Ryan had to go to the office for some important meetings he couldn't postpone. Before he left, he called Peter over. "Peter, I have to go out for a few hours. Can you look after your sister and help your mum with whatever she needs?" The boy nodded seriously. "You can count on me, Ryan. I'll take care of it." When Ryan returned late that afternoon, he found a scene that made him stop at the door. Julia was in the garden with the children. Mariah was running after butterflies, laughing loudly, while Peter was trying to climb one of the smaller trees. Julia was sitting on the grass, watching her children with a smile on her face that Ryan hadn't seen before. It was a smile of peace, of relief, of hope. He stood there at the door for a few minutes, just watching, without them noticing his presence. Something inside him warmed at the sight. His house, his garden, which had always been so empty, were now full of life. And for the first time since his father's passing, Ryan felt that maybe, just maybe, he could find a new purpose for his life. A purpose that went beyond numbers on balance sheets and real estate contracts. A purpose that involved real people, real emotions, real human connections. And that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Chapter 3. The following weeks brought significant changes for everyone in the Upper East Side mansion. Ryan enrolled Peter in a nearby private school, a renowned institution that offered a quality education and had a special program for students who needed extra support after being away from school. The boy was accepted immediately when the headmaster learned that Ryan Caldwell was the one footing the bill. Peter woke up excited every morning, put on his new uniform with pride, and came home in the afternoon full of stories about what he had learned. Mariah, still in the process of full recovery, spent her days at home with her mother. The two played in the garden, colored pictures at the kitchen table, and watched educational shows on the living room television. The little girl was gaining weight quickly, her cheeks becoming fuller, her laughter sounding more frequent and genuine. She had become attached to Ryan in a way that surprised everyone, including the businessman himself. Every time he came home from work, Mariah would run to the door shouting, "Uncle Ryan, Uncle Ryan," and jump into his arms for a tight hug. Ryan didn't know how to handle so much affection at first. He had never been close to children, had no nieces or nephews, and had no experience with the world of spontaneous hugs and sincere displays of affection. But he gradually got used to it and discovered that he loved those moments when Mariah ran to him. It was a feeling of being important to someone, of being expected, of truly mattering in another person's life. Julia, for her part, took over the care of the house with an impressive dedication. She cooked delicious meals using recipes she had learned from her mother, kept every room impeccably clean and organized, and brought a human warmth to the mansion that had been missing for years. Mrs. Celia loved having company while she worked, and the two quickly became friends, sharing stories, recipes, and laughter as they folded laundry or cleaned windows. Ryan started coming home from the office earlier. Before, he would stay late working because there was no reason to return to an empty house. Now there was. There was dinner being prepared by Julia, with that wonderful aroma that filled the entire house. There was Peter needing help with his math homework. There was Mariah wanting to show him the new drawing she had made. There were conversations during meals, laughter in the living room, life pulsing in every room. It was on one of those nights, about a month after the family's arrival, that Ryan made a discovery that would change everything again. He went upstairs to check if Peter was doing his homework, and as he passed Julia's room, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. He didn't mean to peek, but something caught his attention. A soft light was coming from inside the room, and he heard a rhythmic sound he couldn't identify. He knocked lightly on the door. "Julia, may I come in?" "Of course," she replied. Ryan opened the door and stopped, surprised by the scene before him. Julia was sitting in a chair near the window with a piece of fabric spread across her lap. In her hands she held a needle and thread, and she was sewing by hand with precise, delicate movements. On the bed were other pieces of fabric cut into specific shapes, pins organized in a small pincushion, sewing scissors, and some colorful buttons. "You sew?" Ryan asked, genuinely surprised. Julia looked at the fabric in her hands with a mix of affection and melancholy. "Yes. I learned from my mother when I was a child. She was a professional seamstress, made custom dresses for special clients. I grew up watching her work, learned all the tricks, all the stitches, all the secrets. When she passed away 10 years ago, I kept sewing as a way to feel close to her." Ryan moved closer, looking more carefully at her work. Even with his untrained eye, he could see the quality. The stitches were uniform, delicate, almost invisible. The finishing was impeccable. "And what are you making now?" "A dress for Mariah. I found these fabrics at a thrift store nearby when I went to the market with Mrs. Celia. I spent a little of the allowance you gave me. I hope you don't mind. I wanted to make something special for her, something beautiful that was just hers." Ryan looked at the pieces of fabric and realized he could already visualize the dress taking shape. It would be a simple yet elegant dress, with delicate details on the sleeves and a sash at the waist. "Julia, this is incredible. You're very talented." She smiled shyly. "It's just sewing, nothing special." "No, seriously, this is art. Have you ever thought about doing this professionally?" Julia let out a humorless laugh. "I have. In fact, it was my dream when I was younger. I wanted to have my own studio, create unique pieces, see people wearing my creations. But life happened. I got married young, had kids, needed a steady job with a guaranteed salary. Sewing just became a hobby, something I did in my spare time." "What if you could revive that dream?" Ryan asked, an idea beginning to form in his mind. Julia looked at him skeptically. "Ryan, professional seamstresses need infrastructure, industrial machines, a proper space, quality materials, clients willing to pay. All of that costs a lot of money, money I don't have. What if I invested in you?" The silence that followed was heavy. Julia stared at him as if he had said something completely absurd. "What do you mean, invest in me?" Ryan sat on the edge of the bed, thinking as he spoke. "I have an empty room on the 3rd floor. It was my father's office, but it's been unused since he passed. It's large, has good natural light, a beautiful view. It could be turned into a perfect studio. I would buy the necessary machines, the materials, everything you'd need. You would create your pieces, and I would help promote your work. I have contacts, I know people in the fashion world, boutique owners. I could open doors for you." Julia shook her head slowly, clearly in disbelief. "Ryan, you've already done too much for us. I can't accept anything more. That would be taking advantage of your kindness." "It wouldn't be taking advantage. It would be a partnership, an investment. I believe in your talent. If your pieces are as good as I think they'll be, you won't need me for long. You'll be able to establish yourself, earn your own money, have your independence. This isn't charity, Julia. It's an opportunity." She was silent for a long moment, looking at the unfinished dress in her hands. Ryan could see the conflict happening inside her, pride fighting against desire, the fear of failure fighting against the hope of realizing an old dream. Finally, she spoke in a low voice. "If I accept, it has to be clear that I will pay everything back. Every cent you invest in me, I will return as soon as I start making money from sales. It's a deal. But for now, let's focus on setting up your studio and making you shine." Julia wiped away a tear that had escaped. "Why are you doing this, Ryan? Why do you believe in me so much when you barely know me?" Ryan thought about the answer. "Because when I saw you in that park, I saw something I recognized. I saw someone who was fighting against the world but not giving up. I saw dignity, strength, love. And now seeing your work, I see real talent. Someone needs to give you a chance, Julia, and I want to be that person." In the following days, Ryan began working on transforming his father's old office into a sewing studio. He hired an interior designer who specialized in creative workspaces and explained exactly what Julia would need. Together they planned every detail. The room was completely renovated. The walls were painted a soft shade of beige that reflected the natural light without straining the eyes. A large work table was installed by the window, providing perfect natural light for delicate work. Shelves were mounted on the walls to organize fabrics, threads, buttons, and other materials. A professional mannequin was placed in one corner, and a full-length mirror was installed in another. The centerpiece of the studio was a state-of-the-art industrial sewing machine, capable of working with a wide variety of fabrics. Ryan also bought a professional serger, a computerized embroidery machine, and all the tools a seamstress could possibly need: scissors of various sizes, special rulers, measuring tapes, pins, needles of all types, threads in every imaginable color. When everything was ready 2 weeks later, Ryan blindfolded Julia and led her up the stairs to the 3rd floor. Peter and Mariah followed excitedly, in on the surprise, but heroically keeping the secret. Ryan stopped in front of the studio door, his hand on the knob. "Ready?" he asked. Julia, still blindfolded, nodded nervously. "I think so." He opened the door and guided her inside. Then he carefully removed the blindfold. Julia blinked as her eyes adjusted to the light, and then they widened as she saw the studio before her. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp of surprise. "Ryan," she whispered, turning slowly to take in every detail. "Is this for me?" "All yours," he confirmed, smiling at her reaction. Julia walked through the space as if in a trance. She ran her hands over the work table, gently touched the sewing machine, opened the drawers filled with organized materials. Tears began to fall freely down her face. "I can't believe it," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "It's perfect. It's everything I've ever dreamed of." "How did you know?" "I paid attention when you talked about your dream, and I had help from a professional designer who knows her stuff." Peter and Mariah ran inside, exploring the studio with curiosity. Mariah was fascinated by the mannequin, thinking it was a giant doll. Peter examined the sewing machine with technical fascination, wanting to understand how it worked. Julia approached Ryan, and for the first time since they met, she hugged him. It was a sincere, tight hug, full of gratitude and emotion. Ryan tensed for a second, not used to this kind of contact, but then he relaxed and returned the hug. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear. "Thank you for believing in me. I will make every cent of this investment worth it. I promise." "I know you will," he replied. From that day on, Julia worked in the studio every day. She woke up early, took Peter to school, and spent the morning creating, while Mariah played in her room or in the garden under Mrs. Celia's supervision. In the afternoon, she picked Peter up from school and then returned to the studio to continue working until dinner time. The first pieces she created were casual, simple, yet elegant dresses. Ryan photographed each one and posted them on social media, tagging some businesswomen friends he knew. The response was immediate. Women started asking where they could buy the pieces, how much they cost if she did custom orders. Within 3 weeks, Julia had her first real client. Christine Fisher, the wife of one of Ryan's business partners, ordered a dress for a charity event. Julia was nervous, but Ryan encouraged her. "You can do this. Trust your talent." The dress was an absolute success. Christine wore it to the party and received countless compliments. 3 other women asked for the seamstress's contact information that same night. Soon, Julia had a waiting list of clients wanting exclusive pieces. Ryan helped her set fair prices, explaining to Julia that her work had value and that she shouldn't charge less than she deserved. She was shocked by the prices he suggested, finding it absurd that anyone would pay so much for a dress. But the clients paid without complaint, some even saying it was a bargain for the level of quality and exclusivity. In 2 months, Julia had a steady stream of orders. She was producing about 3 pieces a week, each sold for amounts that totaled more than she used to earn in a whole month at her old jobs. She opened a bank account and started saving money, planning for the day she could pay back Ryan's investment and rent her own place. But it wasn't just professional success that was happening. The bonds between the 4 residents of the mansion were strengthening in deep and unexpected ways. Ryan became a natural father figure to the children. Every night after dinner, he helped Peter with his homework. The boy was truly gifted in math, and Ryan loved watching that young mind work through problems, finding creative solutions. They would spend hours at the dining room table, discussing equations, laughing when Peter found clever shortcuts that even Ryan hadn't thought of. With Mariah, the connection was different, but just as strong. The little girl had chosen him as her favorite person in the house. She wanted Ryan to put her to bed every night, telling her stories he made up on the spot about brave princesses and kind knights. One night, as Ryan finished a story about a princess who saved her kingdom using intelligence instead of magic, Mariah looked at him with her sleepy little eyes and said, "Uncle Ryan, I wish you were my real daddy." Ryan felt something break and at the same time rebuild inside his chest. He didn't know what to say. He stroked the girl's hair and said softly, "You're very special to me, Mariah. Very special." "I love you too, Uncle Ryan," she whispered before closing her eyes and falling asleep. Ryan left the room with tears. In his eyes, something that hadn't happened since his father's passing. He found Julia in the hallway. She had heard the conversation through the slightly ajar door. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I know she's getting too attached to you. I'll talk to her." "No," Ryan said quickly. "You don't have to. I like it. I like being important to her. To you all." Julia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. There was gratitude there, of course. But there was something more, something that made Ryan's heart race in a way he didn't understand. "You are important to us, Ryan, more than we can express." The two stood there in the hallway, the silence between them heavy with unspoken emotions. Ryan noticed that Julia looked different in that moment. Her hair was down, falling over her shoulders in brown waves. She was wearing a simple dress she had made herself, which accentuated her figure elegantly without being provocative. There was something in the way she looked at him that made Ryan feel truly seen, not as the heir to the Caldwell fortune, but as Ryan, the man. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he just nodded goodnight and walked away toward his room, his heart beating faster than normal. That wasn't the only time Ryan felt that strange tension between him and Julia. It started happening frequently, small moments in their daily lives that took on an emotional weight that neither of them knew how to handle. One morning, Ryan came down to the kitchen earlier than usual and found Julia making coffee. She had her back to him, humming a soft tune as she stirred something in a pan. her bare feet on the cool floor, her hair still messy. From sleep, the way the morning light came through the window and illuminated her silhouette, it all made Ryan stop at the door and just watch. It wasn't sexual desire, or at least not just that. It was something deeper. It was the feeling that this scene, this woman in this kitchen, made his house feel like a real home. Julia turned and saw him standing there. "Good morning. I didn't hear you come in." "Good morning," he replied, embarrassed at being caught staring. "Sorry if I startled you." "You didn't. Want some coffee?" "Yes, please." They had coffee together while the rest of the house was still asleep. They talked about their plans for the day, about the orders Julia had for the week, about the presentation Peter had at school. It was a normal, everyday conversation, but there was an intimacy in those shared morning moments that Ryan was beginning to value more than any business meeting. Another significant moment happened on a rainy afternoon. Ryan was working in his home office when he heard a scream from the garden. He ran to the window and saw Julia and the children running inside, soaked by the sudden downpour. They came in through the back door laughing loudly, taking off their wet shoes, wringing out their drenched clothes. Ryan went down to see if they were okay and found a scene of pure joy. Mariah was dancing in the puddle of water that had formed on the floor. Peter was trying to dry his hair with a towel that was too small, and Julia was laughing so hard she could barely stand. When she saw him, her eyes sparkled. "Sorry about the mess, Ryan. The rain caught us by surprise." "It's okay," he said, but he couldn't take his eyes off her. Her wet dress clung to her body, her hair was dripping water, her cheeks were flushed from laughing. She was beautiful in a completely natural way, without any artifice, without makeup, just being herself. Julia noticed his gaze and suddenly became shy. "We should probably go up and change before we all catch a cold." That night, Ryan couldn't sleep. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about Julia, about how she had completely changed his life in just a few months. He found himself imagining what it would be like if this wasn't temporary. If Julia and the children weren't just guests in his house, but truly a part of his life, a part of his family. The idea should have scared him, but it didn't. On the contrary, it brought a sense of completeness he didn't know was possible to feel, and that scared him a little, because Ryan knew he was getting too attached, feeling too much, and he had no idea what to do with all these feelings. Chapter 4. December arrived, bringing the typical New York City holiday energy. The streets were filled with Christmas decorations, stores played festive music, on a loop, and there was something in the air that made people smile more easily. For Ryan, this Christmas would be completely different from any he had ever experienced. In recent years, he had spent the holiday alone or at formal dinners with business partners. There was no decorated tree in his house, no presents, no real celebration. Christmas was just another day on the calendar. But now, with Julia and the children living with him, everything would be different. And Ryan wanted it to be special. He wanted to create memories that would last forever because, although he didn't have the courage to admit it out loud yet, he knew he never wanted this family to leave. Julia was thriving in an impressive way. Her work as a designer was already recognized throughout the circuit of influential women in New York. A luxury boutique on Madison Avenue, one of the most elegant streets in the city, had contacted her with a partnership proposal. They wanted Julia to create an exclusive collection of 10 pieces for the spring season. The payment offered was so generous that Julia had to sit down when she heard the amount. She told Ryan that night, her eyes shining with excitement but also with unshed tears. "This is more money than I used to make in a whole year, Ryan. A whole year working Monday through Saturday, killing myself at jobs that barely paid the rent. And now they're going to pay me this for 10 dresses. 10. Ryan smiled, as proud of her as a father would be of a daughter. "You deserve this, and so much more, Julia. Your talent is unique. These people recognize quality when they see it." But she didn't smile back. Instead, she grew serious, a clear weight on her shoulders. "Ryan, with this money, I'll be able to pay back everything you invested in me, and I'll have enough to rent a small apartment for me and the kids, a place of our own." Ryan's heart sank. He knew this day would eventually come. that the agreement had always been for Julia to stay only temporarily until she could get back on her feet. But hearing it, knowing that soon the house would be empty and silent again, without Mariah's laughter, without his conversations with Peter, without Julia's presence, was painful in a way he wasn't prepared to feel. "You don't have to leave," he said, faster than he intended. "I mean, of course you can if you want to, but you don't have to feel obligated. This house is big. There's plenty of room." Julia looked at him with an expression that mixed sadness and something else. "Ryan, you've already done so much for us. I can't abuse your hospitality forever. You have your own life. You need your space. And I need to prove to myself that I can take care of my children, that I can support myself." "You're not a burden, Julia. You never were." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "In fact, you've brought life to this house, to me. I was living on autopilot before I met you, just working, with no real purpose, no connection to anything, and now everything has changed." Julia was silent, looking down at her hands. "I know, Ryan, and I'm grateful for everything. But I need to do this. I need to show my children that their mother is strong, that she can overcome obstacles, that she doesn't have to depend on the kindness of strangers forever." "We're not strangers anymore," Ryan said softly. "No," she agreed, looking up at him with those eyes that seemed to see right into his soul. "We're not." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken words, with feelings that neither of them had the courage to name. Ryan wanted to say so many things. He wanted to say that he woke up every morning eager to come downstairs and find her in the kitchen. He wanted to say that the stories he told Mariah at night were the best part of his day. He wanted to say that helping Peter with his math made him feel useful, in a way that closing million-dollar deals never had. He wanted to say that he was falling in love with her, with this strong, dignified woman who had faced the world and refused to be broken. But the words were stuck in his throat. Julia wanted to say things too. She wanted to admit that she felt something for Ryan that went far beyond gratitude. She wanted to say that his presence made her feel safe for the first time in years. She wanted to say that watching him play with her children made her heart warm in a way. That scared her. She wanted to say that she was starting to imagine a life with him, not as a guest but as a partner. But fear paralyzed her. Fear of misreading the signs. Fear that he was just being kind and she was mistaking kindness for something more. Fear of ruining the only stability her children had known in a long time. So they both remained silent, letting the moment pass, letting the unspoken words float between them like ghosts of possibilities. Ryan left that conversation determined. If Julia was leaving soon, he wanted to make this last Christmas together unforgettable. And more than that, he finally needed to find the courage to say what he felt. He couldn't let her leave without at least trying, without at least giving them a chance to be more than just a landlord and a temporary tenant, to be a real family. In the following days, Ryan began to plan in secret. He hired a landscape designer to transform the mansion's garden into something magical. He asked for help from Christine Fisher, Julia's first client, who was thrilled to be part of the surprise. He bought 3 rings from one of New York's most renowned jewelers. They weren't traditional engagement rings. They were symbols, promises. One for Julia, one for Peter, and one for Mariah. Because Ryan wasn't just asking Julia to marry him. He was asking to be part of their family, to be the father the children deserved, to build something together that none of them had ever had before, a family chosen by love, not by blood. Peter was the first to notice that something was different. He saw the whispered conversations between Ryan and Mrs. Celia, noticed the strange activity in the garden, which was mysteriously covered by tarps. One afternoon he approached Ryan in his office. "Uncle Ryan, can I ask you something?" "Of course, Peter, you always can." The boy hesitated, nervously fiddling with a pen he had picked up from the desk. "Do you like my mom?" Ryan was completely frozen by the direct question. Well, yes, of course I do. She's an amazing person." "No." Peter shook his head. "I mean, do you like her? Like the way grown-ups like each other?" Ryan looked at this 10-year-old boy, so mature for his age, who had been through so much and was now looking at him with a seriousness that demanded complete honesty. "Yes, Peter, I like your mom very much. More than I probably should. Peter smiled, a genuine smile full of relief. Good, because she likes you too. I see it in the way she looks at you when she thinks no one is watching. And I wanted to tell you something. Mariah and we wouldn't mind if you two got together for real. Actually, we'd love it. You're the best thing that's ever happened to our family. Ryan felt his eyes burn with tears he refused to let fall. Peter, that means the world to me, it really does. And actually, I'm planning a surprise for your mum, a big one, but I need your help. Would you be my accomplice? Peter's eyes lit up. Of course I will. Christmas Eve arrived with a clear, starry sky, a rarity for New York. Ryan had arranged everything down to the smallest detail. The garden was ready, hidden under the tarps. The rings were in his drawer. The children were in on the plan and nearly bursting with anticipation to see their mother's reaction. During the day, everything proceeded as normal. Ryan pretended to be working in his office, while in reality he was too nervous to focus on anything. Julia spent the day sewing, trying to finish an order before the festivities. The children played, but every half hour they would ask when the surprise was going to happen. As the sun began to set, Ryan gathered his courage and went down to the living room, where Julia was watching a movie with the children. Julia, could you come with me for a moment? There's something I want to show you. She looked at him confused. Now, I was in the middle of the movie with the kids. Please, it's important. Peter and Mariah stood up immediately, exchanging knowing glances. Let's go too, Mom, Mariah said, pulling on her mother's hand. Julia allowed herself to be led, growing more confused by the second. Ryan took them through the house to the back door that led to the garden. He stopped there, his hand on the doorknob, his heart beating so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. Ready? He asked. Ryan, what's going on? Julia was visibly nervous now. He opened the door, and what Julia saw left her completely speechless. The garden had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. Hundreds of tiny lights were strung through the trees, creating an artificial starry sky. In the center of the garden, elegant arch-like structures had been set up, and on them were displayed 10 dresses. The 10 dresses Julia had created for the Madison Avenue boutique. Each one was perfectly lit, displayed like works of art in a museum. Elegant tables were arranged around the garden, covered with white tablecloths and lit by candles. Soft music played from hidden speakers, and in the center of it all, a small circular platform stood empty, waiting. Julia brought her hands to her mouth, tears already beginning to fall. Ryan, what is all this? This, he said, guiding her into the garden, is a gallery to celebrate you, your talent, your strength, everything you've accomplished. Each of these dresses tells a story, the story of a woman who didn't give up when the world pushed her down, who fought for her children with everything she had, who turned pain into art. Julia walked among the dresses, touching each one with reverence. The tears were flowing freely now. This is unbelievable. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, Ryan said, his own voice trembling, because I'm not finished. He led her to the circular platform in the center. Peter and Mariah were already positioned beside it, holding small boxes Ryan had given them earlier. Ryan took a deep breath, gathering all the courage he had. And then, there in the middle of that transformed garden, surrounded by Julia's creations lit up like stars, he got down on one knee. Julia let out a sound that was half a sob, half a muffled scream. Her legs felt weak, and she placed her hands on Ryan's shoulders to steady herself. Julia, he began, his voice now firm, filled with emotion but clear. A few months ago, I made a promise to my father. A promise I didn't fully understand at the time. He asked me to get out of my ivory tower, to see the real world, to connect with real people. And then you came into my life, you and these 2 incredible children, and everything changed. He paused, looking up at her with an intensity that made Julia's heart pound. You taught me what really matters in life. You taught me that wealth isn't in properties or bank accounts, but in shared moments, in sincere laughter, in tight hugs. You brought life to this empty house. You brought life to me. And I don't want you to leave. Ever. Ryan took the first box from his pocket and opened it, revealing an elegant white gold ring with small inset diamonds. "Julia, will you marry me? Not because you have to, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because over these last few months I've fallen in love with you. With your strength, your dignity, your unconditional love for your children, the way you see beauty where others only see fabric. I love you, Julia. I truly love you. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving it to you every single day." Julia couldn't speak. The tears were so thick they blurred her vision. She just nodded her head frantically, repeating yes, softly, over and over again. Ryan placed the ring on her finger with trembling hands. Then he turned to the children. "Peter, Mariah, come here, please." The children approached, their eyes also shining with tears. Ryan took the boxes they were holding and opened them, revealing 2 smaller rings appropriate for children, each with a small colored stone in the center. "Peter, Mariah," Ryan said, looking at each of them. "I'm not just asking your mum to marry me. I'm asking for your permission to be part of this family, to be the father you deserve, to be there for you at every school play, for every hug when you're sad, for every victory when you're happy. I'm asking for us to be a real family. Will you accept?" Mariah didn't wait a second. She leaped into Ryan's arms, nearly knocking him over, shouting, "Yes, yes, yes, I want you to be my daddy." Ryan held her tight, burying his face in her hair as he tried to control his own tears. He placed the small ring on her finger, and she examined it with delight. Peter approached more slowly, but the emotion on his face was just as raw. His lower lip trembled as he spoke. "We never had a real dad, but if we did, I'd want him to be just like you, Uncle Ryan. Just like you." Ryan hugged the boy too, and then placed the ring on his finger. Then the 4 of them stood there, wrapped in a group hug in the middle of that magical garden, crying and laughing at the same time, a family finally complete. When they finally separated, Julia held Ryan's face in her hands. "I love you too," she said. "I was so afraid to admit it, afraid I was wrong, afraid of ruining everything. But I love you, Ryan. I love how you care for my children as if they were your own. I love how you believe in me when I don't even believe in myself. I love the person you are, not the money you have, just you." Ryan kissed her then, a soft kiss full of promise, of a future, of true love. The children clapped and cheered, and the sound of their laughter filled the transformed garden. Mrs. Celia appeared at the back door, also with tears in her eyes, announcing that dinner was ready. She had prepared a full Christmas Eve dinner, knowing about Ryan's plan. Roast turkey, stuffing, rice with raisins, glazed ham, colorful salads, bread pudding. Everything was perfect. They ate dinner that night as a family. They talked, laughed, told stories, made plans for the future. Ryan revealed that he had booked a trip for all of them to go to the beach in January. Mariah squealed with excitement, having never been to the ocean before. Peter asked if they could build sandcastles, and Ryan promised they would build the biggest castle the beach had ever seen. After dinner, they went to the living room, where a giant Christmas tree was decorated with gold and silver ornaments. Underneath the tree, piles of presents were waiting. Ryan had bought them carefully, thinking about each person specifically. For Mariah, besides dolls and games, there was a complete set of art supplies, paints, brushes, sketchbooks. For Peter, besides books and video games, there was a small but functional telescope so he could explore his curiosity about the universe. For Julia, besides the professional embroidery machine he had ordered months before, there was a delicate piece of jewelry, a necklace with a pendant shaped like an intertwined needle and thread, a discreet but powerful symbol of what she represented. The children opened their presents with an excitement that warmed Ryan's heart. Seeing the pure happiness on their faces was worth more than any deal he had ever closed. Julia cried when she saw the necklace, putting it on immediately and promising she would never take it off. "I have something for you too," she said shyly. "It's not much. I couldn't buy anything expensive, but I made it with love." She ran to get the gift and returned with a carefully wrapped package. Ryan opened it and found a custom-made dress shirt, hand-sewn by Julia. The fabric was of exceptional quality, in a shade of dark blue that would perfectly match his eyes. But what touched him most was the inside pocket where Julia had discreetly embroidered something. He read the embroidered words and felt the tears return. For Ryan, with eternal love, Julia. "It's perfect," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's the most perfect thing I've ever received." That night, after the children had finally gone to sleep, exhausted from all the excitement, Ryan and Julia stood on the balcony, looking at the stars. She was nestled in his arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the beat of his heart. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this," Julia said softly. 6 months ago, I was on the street with my children, not knowing if we would have food the next day, and now I'm engaged to the most incredible man I've ever met. My business is thriving, my children are healthy and happy. It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream," Ryan said, kissing the top of her head. "It's real as the love I feel for you." "Do you think your father would be proud," she asked, "of the man you've become?" Ryan thought about the question, remembering his father's last words, the promise he had made. "I think so. He wanted me to find purpose, to connect with the real world. And you gave me that. You gave me a family. You gave me love. You gave me a reason to wake up every day excited for what's to come. So yes, I think he would be proud." They stood there for hours, just enjoying each other's presence, making plans for the wedding, for the future, for the life they would build together. They decided to get married in the spring, in a small, intimate ceremony in the mansion's garden, the same garden where Ryan had proposed. Peter would be the ring-bearer, Mariah the flower girl. It would be perfect. In the months that followed, the life of this newly formed family blossomed in ways none of them could have imagined. Julia continued to thrive professionally. Her collection for the Madison Avenue boutique was an absolute success, selling out in 3 days. Fashion magazines started requesting interviews. She was being recognized not just as a talented seamstress, but as an artist, a designer with her own voice and unique style. Ryan, inspired by Julia's transformation, began to use his wealth and influence in more meaningful ways. He created a foundation to support vulnerable women who wanted to start their own businesses. He helped build dignified shelters for homeless families. He discovered that using his resources to transform lives was infinitely more satisfying than just accumulating more properties. Peter continued to excel in school, his confidence growing every day. He had a father now, someone who picked him up from school, who attended his performances, who taught him about life. Mariah, fully recovered, was a vibrant and energetic little girl who called Ryan Daddy without any hesitation, and every time she did, his heart warmed. The promise Ryan had made to his father on that hospital bed had been fulfilled in a way that surpassed all expectations. He had left his ivory tower. He had gotten to know the real world, real people, real life. And in the process, he had found his own life. He had found love, family, purpose. The story of Ryan and Julia was not a fairy tale in the traditional sense. There were no perfect princes or helpless princesses. It was the story of two people, broken in different ways, who found each other at the right time, who helped each other rebuild, who chose to create something together that was stronger than the sum of their individual parts. It was the story of a family formed not by blood, but by choice, by love, by a mutual commitment to be there for each other through good days and bad. It was a story of second chances, of new beginnings, of faith in human kindness in a world that often seems cruel. It was proof that a single moment of compassion, a single decision to extend a hand instead of turning away, can change lives in unimaginable ways. And as that family celebrated their first Christmas, together, as the garden lights glowed softly and the stars watched from above, one thing was clear. The emptiness Ryan had felt was filled. The struggle Julia had fought had ended in victory, and 4 people who were strangers months ago were now a family, united by the strongest of bonds, a love that was chosen, built day by day, moment by moment, until it became unbreakable. The mansion on the Upper East Side, that was once a mausoleum of silence, was now a home filled with voices, laughter, occasional arguments, Warm reconciliations, noisy dinners, tight hugs, and unconditional love. It was exactly what it was meant to be. It was exactly where they all belonged, together.